Welcome to our epic selection of World War II heroes. Some say our earlier animations are so bad, even PowerPoint slideshows have better character development. But for now, let's dive into the epic collection of 8 World War II heroes. It's midday on February the 9th, 1944, near the harbour of Nice in southern France. 4 Supermarine Spitfires belonging to the 4th Squadron of the 52nd Fighter Group circle their targets like eagles stalking their prey. On board one of these fighters is pilot Robert Anderson Hoover. He dives for his target and releases the ordnance. The bombs whistle as they fall and strike the sea, exploding around the enemy vessel. Hoover then pulls up. It was a missed drop, but he doesn't have any time to fret over the mistake as he suddenly feels his aircraft is down on power. Simultaneously, high above the clouds, a squadron of FW-190s looks down upon the Allied aircraft below, and they spot an opportunity. Hoover's trying to control his misbehaving aircraft when he looks up and spots 4 enemies barreling down towards him. He instantly radios the other Spitfires for help as he steers his crippled plane towards the enemy. He fires upon the 190s and the enemy pull away from their head-on attack. They speed past each other and the German pilots turn around to get on the American's tail. But Hoover won't let it happen so easily. He dives, twists and turns, evading the gunfire and surviving while his fellow Spitfires race to the rescue. They arrive and the chase turns into a chaotic battle. The Spitfires try as they might, but they're operating an older spec of the iconic aircraft, one that's now outclassed by the 190s in almost every respect. Their attacks are avoided with ease, and it doesn't take long before a 190 once again sets his sights on Hoover. Hoover's making a turn when suddenly a single 20mm shell strikes him at the root of the wing. In a blur, the wing shears off and his Spitfire twists in an uncontrollable tumble. Hoover hangs on and pulls himself out of the doomed machine. The parachute opens above the waters of the Mediterranean, with a battle raging above him. The parachute drifts down, and Hoover knows capture is inevitable. He had been fished out of the water by a German freighter. Since then, he spent his time bouncing from one detention facility to another. He was interrogated, tortured, and threatened with execution, but he never responded anything but his name, rank, and service number. 14 months later, on the 20th of April 1945, Hoover wakes up to yet another long day at Stalag Luft 1, a prison camp for captured pilots outside Barth in Germany. Throughout the morning, the prisoners could hear explosions in the distance. It was the Soviets shelling a target several miles away as they pushed back the Germans bit by bit. With the front line encroaching onto the camp, most of the German guards had been sent elsewhere, leaving the camp with little more than a skeleton crew. Not fancying to fall under Soviet care, and with escape enticingly close, Hoover decided it was time for a breakout. Joining forces with pilot Jerome Ennis from the same squadron, a Canadian only known as George, and some cooperation from other prisoners, they hatched a simple plan. Days ago, they had found a wooden plank under one of the camp's buildings. Hoover had hatched an idea on how to use it to escape. They just needed a distraction. Late in the evening, a few of Hoover's friends pretended to get angry at one another, shouting obscenities and escalating to violence.
Hit me before I lose my nerve. Like in the face. Surprise me.
Men quickly gathered around the fight, and the shouting was heard across the camp. The few guards didn't intervene, but kept an eye on the commotion to make sure it didn't blow over. Meanwhile, out of sight, Hoover, Ennis, and George make a run for the fence with the wooden plank in hand. Swiftly, they placed the plank over the barbed wire, and its weight squished it down. One by one, they carefully walked over it, jumping down the other side to freedom. They swiftly disappear into the forest, unseen. Their escape had gone shockingly smooth, even considering how little guards were left. By the time they reached a nearby town, it was just the two of them. George had decided to go his own way, and Hoover would never know what became of him. The night falling, they found and broke into a farmhouse where they could stay the night. The next morning, they were jolted awake by the doors of the farmhouse opening up. They had just been caught. But to their great relief, the woman calmly asked, "Who are you?" in French. She appeared to be French, relocated to Eastern Germany for labor, and when Hoover said he is planning to make a journey to American lines, she gave him a small handgun with a couple of magazines. Moved by this gesture, Hoover wrote a note thanking her and asking any Allied soldier not to harm her. She was very grateful, understanding its implications. Not long after the pair had said their goodbyes to the lady, Hoover and Ennis stole some bicycles and made their way west for several miles until they stumbled across an oddly quiet German airfield with aircraft lined up. Seeing a chance for a ticket home, Hoover insists to break in to investigate. Ennis is less keen.
Are you sure, Bob? It's dangerous.
But he accepts, and the pair jump the fence. The field is deathly quiet, apparently abandoned. Hoover approaches the line of sitting Me-109s, but is disappointed to realize the ones before him have been heavily shot. The base, it seems, was a repair shop. They wade through the line, inspecting each machine. Some are better than others, a few even seeming airworthy, but sadly lacking any fuel. Leaving behind the 109s, Hoover spots an FW-190 and approaches it to inspect it. It looks intact from the outside, so Hoover jumps up to take a peek into the cockpit. It's when both are surprised by someone shouting, "Halt!" Instantly, Ennis draws the pistol and aims it square to a German mechanic's chest. "Freeze!" he orders, and the unarmed German has no option but to comply. With the mechanic held at gunpoint, they prepare the machine for takeoff. The weapons appear to be inoperable, but fortunately, it has a full tank of fuel. Confident that he can fly the machine, Hoover waves for Ennis to climb aboard. But his friend waves back a negative.
I never want to fly again. You go.
Hoover is hesitant, but goes for it. He salutes his good friend for one final time, before closing the canopy and slamming the throttle to full. The 190 picks up speed quickly. Hoover doesn't bother taxiing at all. He sends it straight through the grass, and the machine rises into the air. Gaining altitude, Hoover is now faced with the issue of navigation. He's no idea where he is, but with the altitude, he spots the northern coast of Germany and uses the position of the sun to figure out the cardinal directions. With those two things to work with, he decides to make his way west, hoping to see the iconic windmills of the Netherlands. The entire time he flies with his heart racing on his chest, the reality of what he's doing is beginning to hit. He's taking a German plane with German markings and flying it straight over a very active front line, hoping to land on Allied-held territory. It was nothing short of a death wish. He attempted flying just below the clouds to avoid detection, but he knew he was on a wing and a prayer. He flew and flew over the Jutland Peninsula and following the coast beyond, completely blind as to what exactly lay below him. And then a windmill appeared on the horizon. Somehow he had passed the front undisturbed. He spots a couple of airfields, but fears he could either be attacked or land on a mined runway. Instead, he aims for a grass field. He slows as much as possible, skimming the ground, until the aircraft stalls and the belly slams onto the ground. Hoover is shaken but unharmed. Local farmers swarm the crash site, pitchforks in hand. They order him to get out in Dutch, believing him to be German. He's captured by the angry civilians and taken to a nearby town where a British Army supply truck happened to be passing by, and he was able to explain the situation. The British soldiers took him in, and he'd finally earned his freedom. Robert Anderson Hoover would survive the war and go on to gain fame as a stunt flyer, test pilot, and instructor. Jerome Ennis would also successfully escape. They reunited years later during one of Hoover's air shows, during which Ennis passed the time telling the story of their escape to the guests. For his side, Hoover was never proud of that flight, stating, "It was about the dumbest thing I'd ever done." Roughly a week after his escape, the last of the German guards fled Stalag Luft 1, and it was properly liberated by the Red Army on May the 1st. So Hoover would very likely have survived anyway. Still, he remains one of the very few to have the honor of having stolen a Luftwaffe warplane. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross for the dogfight that led to his capture.
Jared, get on in. I'll give you a ride. I told you, I never want to fly again.
He lived a long life and passed away in 2016, aged 94. It's the 2nd of July, 1941. In a field kitchen and a forest near Dunaburg, Latvia, Ivan Pavlovich Sereda calmly peels potatoes for the evening soup. Graduate from Culinary College, Sereda is assigned to the 91st Tank Regiment, 46th Tank Division of the 21st Mechanized Corps as a cook. It's a grim scene at the camp. They've been fighting for 4 days straight and losses are mounting. All around him are men in limbo, tank crews with no tank, drivers without cars, and soldiers recovering from wounds. They clean their weapons, do laundry, smoke, and chat with each other. The only people that seemed to have a set purpose were the mechanics running around fixing the many damaged tanks littered outside. Then suddenly, a liaison to the battalion commander arrives at the camp, shouting and ordering everyone to get your weapons and move out. A new push by the Germans threatens to encircle Allied forces, and every able-bodied man is desperately needed to plug holes in the front line, this ragged group of reserves included. All except him. As a cook, Sereda is ordered to stay in place preparing meals as everyone else fights. If the front falls, he is to defend the camp to the death. As such, he can do nothing but watch as the men around him drop everything and rush into battle. The camp is left alone and deathly quiet, a far cry from the scene just moments prior. The eerie silence is only broken by the crackles of the fire, the boiling water, and the distant echoes of battle. In the middle of the dead camp, still sits Sereda, preparing meals for the men, fortunate enough to come back. A while later, a distant sound gets his attention. That distinctive rumble of engines and squeaks of tank suspension. More damaged tanks? He leaves his work behind to go and take a look. Outside, in a cloud of dust, he spots some vehicles in the distance approaching his position. He considers lifting his hand to greet them, but something is wrong. The shape of the tanks is off. His blood runs cold as he realizes those aren't his comrades. They are German panzers. He stares at the scene for a few eternal gut-wrenching moments, almost wishing for his eyes to be deceiving him, but they aren't. Sereda runs behind the kitchen tent, the soup long forgotten. Peeking out from his hiding place, he can see the tanks slowly approaching. But also, he spots his rifle resting abandoned against a sack of potatoes. He curses silently to himself and desperately searches around the back of the tent for a weapon, any weapon. He quickly finds an axe they use to break firewood and takes it. It probably can't do much against a tank, but it will have to do. With the rumble of the tanks becoming ever louder, he takes another peek and watches as the German armor rolls by the camp. 2 Panzer Kampfwagen 38Ts drive by, giving his kitchen little attention, but the third steers directly towards him. He hides and needs to think fast if he's to come out of this alive. Hearing the tank come to a stop and looking back out, he sees the German tank parked right in front of his kitchen. The turret hatch swings open and the tank commander's head pops out. The German appears to laugh and say things to his crew before nonchalantly jumping out of the machine and walking towards the seemingly abandoned kitchen. He watches the commander, waiting for an opportunity, gathering his courage, gripping his axe. Then he strikes, charging out of his position, brandishing the axe high above his head and screaming like a madman. The German sees a sweaty, ragged figure with an apron and an axe charging towards him, and he runs for his life, fleeing right back to the safety of the tank. Sereda chases him down through the kitchen and picks up his rifle along the way. The commander climbs up and quickly disappears inside the vehicle, closing and locking the hatch behind him. Moments later, the tank's machine gun starts firing erratically, obviously unable to see Sereda. Diving out of the machine gun's arc of fire, he sits in a blind spot as he assesses the situation. Then he spots a tarp lying on the floor. Thinking quickly, he grabs the tarp and throws it on the tank's turret, blinding it. The tankers continue firing the machine gun despite being unable to see. Ripping through the entire kitchen, Sereda takes another piece of cloth and throws it onto the co-driver's vision port. Then he runs around behind the tank, takes off his apron and covers the driver's viewing port as well. The tank is now completely blind, yet they keep indiscriminately firing the machine gun. Fueled by adrenaline, Sereda jumps on the German warbeast and smacks the barrel of the machine gun with the axe repeatedly. The machine gun operator is confounded as the stock moves inside the tank in response to the pummeling from the axe. The German keeps firing though. Whatever this Soviet monster is on the tank, it will be stopped by German lead, or so he thinks. As the barrel heats up through the continuous fire, Sereda is unrelenting. Chop, chop goes the axe. Eventually, the heat of the barrel and the devastating blows from Ivan cause the barrel to bend. The machine gun is now useless, and Sereda goes to work on the tank hull. Each swing of the axe reverberates inside the vehicle like a bell. He starts shouting fake orders to imaginary comrades, telling them, "Get the grenades! Surround the tank!" and giving answers in a different voice. The Germans inside are terrorized for their lives. They've rolled into a Soviet ambush, surrounded by dozens of men, clamoring for revenge against the German invaders. In their minds, there was nothing more to do. Obviously vastly outnumbered, they choose to surrender. The hatch opens underneath the tarpaulin. Sereda waits, weapon at the ready. The commander in the turret opens the hatch. It's dark as the tarpaulin still covers the exit. He carefully climbs up, shouting out, "We surrender!" Slowly and deliberately, the commander removes the tarpaulin. When he finally escapes the clinging tarp, he looks and takes in the scene. Where are the Soviet soldiers? Baffled by what he sees, a lone Soviet soldier standing on top of his tank, aiming a Mosin Nagant at his chest. When the rest of the regiment return from the battle ready for soup, they're surprised not to see their cook by the campfire, but instead, he's holding an entire tank crew prisoner and a working but somewhat battered tank alongside. Sereda was assigned to scout duties after the events and would join his comrades in the front lines less than a week later. The axe he used during the engagement was kept as a memento of the 21st Mechanized Corps. Ivan Pavlovich Sereda proved to be an excellent soldier. He continued to defend his country for the rest of the war, being promoted several times and receiving many awards and commendations throughout. He would serve in the siege of Leningrad and in the Battle of Moscow as platoon commander and would later be promoted to senior lieutenant. As the man who single-handedly defeated a German tank with an axe, Ivan Sereda was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union on the 31st of August 1941. It's April 1945 on the island of Okinawa. The 77th Division are bivouacked at the bottom of the 400-foot-high Maeda Escarpment. The escarpment is made up of a steep incline across boulders and rough terrain, with the last 35 feet a straight vertical. At some places, there's even an overhang. The top of the escarpment is around 75 yards wide, and then it slopes off along the back. Looking up at the hill, Medic, 26-year-old Desmond Doss looks at the impossible challenge ahead. The 77th have been told to take the hill at any cost. Desmond, however, won't be firing a shot in the coming battle. A deeply religious man, Desmond had joined up in the army with the firm conviction that thou shalt not kill. Desmond had already been recommended awards for his extreme bravery under fire in both Guam and Leyte. In the war in the Pacific, being a medic made you even more of a target from enemy fire than a regular soldier. Initially being mistreated and ridiculed for his unwillingness to carry a weapon, Desmond had won the respect and admiration from his brothers in the field, with his determination to save every wounded man, regardless of the personal danger it put him in. The Japanese are dug in all over the hill, with a network of caves and tunnels, some made up of 3 stories connected by ladders deep within the hill. Lieutenant Gaunto asked Doss and 2 other men to attach cargo nets and ladders to the vertical face. The 3 set out under cover of darkness, climbed the cliff, and tied them securely to the coral rocks on the top edge of the Maeda escarpment. Returning, the lieutenant said, "Good job, fellows. It will sure help us get up and down a lot easier, and safer, I hope." In the morning of what was to become known as Miracle Day, the lieutenant addressed his men in Company B. "Those cargo nets are up, so we can get up on top more easily. Do your best, men." Desmond rushed over and said, "The men should really pray before they go up," intending the men to pray for themselves. Instead, the lieutenant said, "Gather round, men. Doss wants to pray for us." Desmond prayed. Companies A and B started the assault of the Maeda escarpment. Reaching the top, Company A was immediately pinned down with many fallen. Company B was given the order to take the hill alone. Moving from pillbox to pillbox, they proceeded to take out 9 pillboxes on that day and returned back without a single man killed and only 1 injured. An incredible event given the circumstances. Headquarters were interested in how it was achieved. Company B sent back the message, "Doss prayed." The Signal Corps sent a photographer to take Doss's picture from the top of the escarpment. Over the days, the battle continued, and the entrenched Japanese defended the hill, taking a toll on the American forces. On May the 5th, Captain Vernon approached Doss. Doss was a Seventh-day Adventist, and in his religion it was the Sabbath. And so the captain said, "Doss, would you mind going up on the escarpment today? You are the only medic we have left, and we really need you." Doss requested he could finish his reading, to which the captain replied, "We'll wait for you." When he was ready, the 155 remaining men in Company B set up the cliff. Things didn't go to plan. Heaving satchel charges into the Japanese positions, the enemy pulled out the fuses before the charges went off. The men then threw gasoline, followed by a grenade. At that point, a massive explosion occurred, as a Japanese ammunition store deep within the hill went off. Like angry hornets, the remaining Japanese defenders took this as a signal to redouble their efforts and swarmed out of every position simultaneously. Firing upon the Americans, the US forces were cut down, and the order to retreat was given as they were swept from the ridge. Tending to the wounded, Doss found himself alone at the top, as the last of his comrades that were able to scrambled down the nets. Doss tended to a wounded man. He was badly hurt. Desmond dragged him to the edge of the cliff, found a rope, and tied him into a stretcher, and lowered the man to the ground. It took some time, and to lower him took colossal effort. At the bottom of the cargo nets, 35 feet below, Desmond shouted down, "Get him to the aid station, pronto!" The soldiers did what they were told. At this point, realizing the time it took, and needing to find a quicker solution, he remembered the bowline knot. He grabbed another injured man and formed a bowline. Putting the man's legs between the loops and doubled the rope, he tied it around the man's chest. He noticed a blasted tree stump and wound the rope around it to give him leverage. Letting the next man down to the amazed soldiers below, Desmond knew what he had to do. Praying, "Lord, help me get one more," he went to work, dodging enemy fire, grabbing the injured and dragging them to the edge, lowering them down and praying, "Lord, help me get one more." It took him 5 hours. In total, he saved over 75 men on the escarpment that was to be known as Hacksaw Ridge. When all the injured had been recovered, Doss climbed down, uninjured. 2 weeks later, Desmond was accompanying soldiers on a night mission into Japanese territory when he was hit by a grenade, damaging his leg. He and another soldier who was hit in the shoulder crawled to the US territory and created a shallow hole to see out the night. After daybreak, the stretcher bearers came to pick up the wounded. Loading Desmond onto a stretcher, they set off for the aid station. While en route, they came across a man with a head injury. Doss knew the soldier should be priority and made the medics stop, rolled off the stretcher, and told the medics to take the more heavily injured man. Doss tried to crawl and walk back with another injured soldier, a friend called Brooks. At that point, he was hit in the arm by an enemy sniper. Doss demanded Brooks' rifle. Surprised, as Desmond had never touched a rifle before, he handed it over. Forming a splint with the rifle, he patched up his arm and almost made it to the medical station before passing out. He woke up in hospital after the doctors had to perform surgery, removing 17 pieces of shrapnel in the process. The military estimated that Doss had saved more than 100 men on that incredible day on Hacksaw Ridge. Doss modestly said, "It couldn't have been more than 50. The Medal of Honor citation that he received for his action reads that he saved 75. Giving him the medal during the ceremony on the White House lawn, President Truman shook the hand of Corporal Desmond Doss and held it the entire time his citation was read aloud. He said to Doss, "I'm proud of you. You really deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president."
It's the early hours of June the 6th, 1944, D-Day.
Head on over to yarnhubstore.com to shop our latest designs and be the envy of all your friends.
The men of the Green Howards, one of Britain's oldest and proudest infantry regiments, are lining up on the Empire Lance, one of the motherships traversing the English Channel. The Yorkshire-based unit has been selected by Field Marshal Montgomery as the spearhead of the landing on Gold Beach. As the Green Howards wait their turn to board the landing crafts, they are handed a last-minute piece of equipment, a condom. A booming voice thunders over the sound of cannon fire. "What are these for?" he bellows. "Are we going to make war to the Germans or screw them?" The voice belongs to Company Sergeant Major Stanley Alton Hollis, who may have used somewhat less polite vocabulary. The large and fiery man has fought with gallantry in all the major theatres of the war, from the Battle of France to Al Alamein to the invasion of Sicily. He is said to have taken down at least 100 enemies. He's survived 5 major injuries. His men call him the man they couldn't kill. But he is about to live his most dangerous day yet. Hollis, one of the old men of the unit, is looked up to by the younger soldiers who look to him to take the lead. Hollis and the Green Howards boarding their landing craft. They're heading to King sector of Gold Beach, braving the violent waves and the defensive barrage discharged by German mortars and field guns. "Everything in the world opened up from behind us," he wrote in his brief memoirs. There were 25-pounders firing off floating platforms firing thousands of rockets in one salvo. Cruisers, destroyers, battleships, everything opened up on the shore. Some of the men are just tense. Most are shaking. All are struggling to look the day in the face and control their bodies. When Stan's craft is within reach of the shore, it's targeted with machine gun fire shot from a German pillbox on their flank. Pulling the cocking handle back on the landing craft's Lewis gun, Hollis unloads the whole ammo drum onto the German strongpoint. Stan pulls the machine gun off its mount to reload, but forgets the barrel is red hot, and with the scorching heat, he sears his hands. The ramp of the craft slams down, and Stan jumps into waist-deep water. As the ground shakes under cannon and mortar shells, the sergeant leads his company up the heavily mined beach. The Green Howards are running up a hill towards the cover offered by a lone house. Suddenly, bursts of fire fall upon them, shot from another pillbox. A well-manned German MG-42 is a formidable foe, but so is this Yorkshireman with a Sten gun. In a moment of extreme courage, Sergeant Stanley Hollis stands up and runs zigzagging towards the enemies, managing to avoid the incoming German bullets. He reaches the enemy position, shoves the gun muzzle into the slit, and squeezes the trigger. Then he climbs on top of the pillbox and throws a hand grenade inside. Stan waits for the explosion as smoke bellows out of the pillbox. He cracks the door open. All the Germans inside the fortification are wounded or too shocked to react. But Sergeant Stanley is not going to stop here, because after seeing another enemy battery, which is parallel to the one he's just destroyed, he fearlessly charges towards it with his mind set on catching another enemy bunker. Hollis manages to capture it and 20 German soldiers all by himself. With 2 German batteries decommissioned, Hollis effectively secured an advance point for Allied troops that have already occupied a good part of the Normandy beaches. According to the war biographer Mike Morgan, without Hollis's contribution, the first attack would have been stopped by the enemy troops, thus a crucial moment of the landing being jeopardized. Asked later why he risked his life so carelessly, Hollis simply replied, "Because I was a Green Howard." While storming another position, Stan throws yet another hand grenade, but forgets to take out the pin first. Luckily for him, the 2 German soldiers don't realize it and keep their heads down. When they realize it's not going off, it's too late. Hollis drops them both. Nearby, several Germans manage to pull back to the south, but Stanley spots them and fires. There's a shot, and it's almost disastrous, but Hollis's cheek is grazed by the bullet. Pushing past the shore, this fiery giant and his platoon are ordered to inspect a farmhouse in the village of Crepon. The only movement in the farmhouse is that of 2 dogs wagging their tails. But Hollis spots an enemy field gun in a nearby orchard. Hollis volunteers to take it out. He picks up a Piat launcher and orders 2 Bren gunners to follow him. The 3 men crawl as closely as possible to the objective. Stan loads the anti-tank weapon, takes aim, and fires. But then it falls short, and he gives away their position. The German gun barrel slowly cranks around towards Hollis and his men. The 3 keep their heads down as a cannon round sears through the air above them. Stanley withdraws and gives the order to withdraw, but his 2 mates can't move as they are pinned down by incoming German fire. Looking back, he realizes that the 2 Bren gunners are still in the orchard. Hollis discards the Piat, grabs a Bren machine gun, and dashes back to help his men. He takes position by the fellow Howards and fires burst after burst towards the Germans. His suppressive fire silences the enemies long enough, allowing for the 2 Bren gunners to crawl to safety. Once they're out of range, Hollis turns back and sprints after them, chased by obstinate but imprecise Mauser bullets. On the 10th of October 1944, at Buckingham Palace, King George VI pins the Victoria Cross on his chest. Wherever the fighting was the fiercest, Sergeant Hollis was there, says the official Victoria Cross report. Stan was the only British soldier to be awarded the VC on D-Day, but he would always downplay his achievements, claiming, "I've just been lucky. If I hadn't done the things I did, then somebody else would have."
It's June the 6th, 1944. D-Day. The landing craft sways back and forth in the heavy waves. First Lieutenant Jimmy W. Monteith of the 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, hangs on for dear life. Ahead are the white sands of Omaha Beach, watched over by fortresses of concrete and steel. Explosions fill the air, the incessant pounding of artillery, but a taste of what they're going to face. The beach comes ever closer, and rain starts clattering against the steel of the craft. But it's not water, but a rain of German lead. The men aboard are terrified. They clutch their rifles, facing down the barrel of what from here seems like an insurmountable foe. Monteith doesn't know it, but he's about to perform a feat that will compel the legendary generals Dwight D. Eisenhower and Omar Bradley to advocate him for the nation's highest honor. The craft comes to a stop, and the moment they've dreaded has arrived.
Move fast. I'll see you on the beach.
The doors fall, and Monteith leads the charge off the boat. They fall into waist-deep water, desperately wading their way through, as machine gun fire splashes all around them and strikes a few unfortunate souls. Monteith doesn't look back. He knows he can't. He reaches dry land and runs, shouting for his men to follow.
Run!
Explosions rocked the beach, prearranged artillery striking up and down the sands, tearing through the men. He runs at 200 yards of carnage, followed by over 100 men. But he's lucky and makes it unharmed. Ahead, they face a web of barbed wire. layered in plain view of deadly pillboxes. He identifies the best spot to blow it open and orders a couple of his men armed with Bangalore mines to follow. They climb and crawl through the sand, hiding behind a meager cover of undergrowth and the barbed wire itself. Machine gun fire rips above their heads as they connect the tubes together and shove it through the barbed wire. They return to the embankment and detonate it, clearing a 9-foot gash into the wire.
Go!
Monteith leaps out of cover, leading the charge through heavy fire. They run through the barbed wire and stop at the foot of their next massive hurdle. 2 minefields block their path. Fortunately, their vicinity to the emplacements have made them harder to spot, and the machine gun nests focus their fire on the poor souls still disembarking and running through the sands. Hurrying not to let the relatives safely to go to waste, the soldiers once again prepare long stretches of Bangalore mines and slide them into the minefield. They lie down for cover, and a mine blows a path through. They run across, reaching the second minefield, and repeat the process. They're placing the mines when suddenly machine gun fire tears through the gathered men. They scatter for cover, and the combat engineers hurriedly detonate the mines. Monteith runs through the minefield, followed by some of his men. They huddle against the rocky embankment lining the beach, taking cover from this surprise pillbox, overlooking their vector of attack. He analyzes the situation. That pillbox must go, and fast. He looks back at the beach and spots 2 Sherman tanks in the sand. German machine gun tracer is ricocheting off their armor. Monteith tells his men to stay put, and fearlessly he charges out of cover, runs back across the beach amidst the hellfire. Running through the obstacles, racing through the killing fields, until he reaches the 2 Shermans. He takes cover beside them and bangs on the armor with his rifle. The commander inside cracks open the hatch and shouts, questioning him, what the hell he wants. Monteith tells him that a pillbox is keeping his advance pinned, and he needs the Shermans to follow him to take it out. The crew agree, and he runs back up the beach. He takes cover on the embankment, waving at the tanks to follow. Guiding them through slowly but surely, he braves the air thick with German lead, signaling the machines by hand through the barbed wire and across the treacherous minefields. Finally, the pillbox comes into view. Monteith runs for the Shermans and shouts its position to the men inside before a volley of gunfire pings off their armor. He hastily takes cover behind the Shermans as they take aim and open fire. The pillbox is silenced with a brutal strike of 75mm shells of high explosive. Satisfied, Monteith and his men charge up the rocks and storm the German trenchworks. They find little resistance within, as the Germans are still focused on the beach. Using the trenches against the enemy, they burst into nearby bunkers and pillboxes and catch the crews by complete surprise. Germans in the neighbouring sectors realize they have a breach and hastily rush to stop it as Monteith and his men take cover against the French hedgerows. Mobile machine gun crews take positions across the field ahead and to either side of Monteith. They are swiftly surrounded, and the German commander shouts at them to surrender. Monteith ignores him. In response to their silence, the Germans open fire. The air is filled with the cracks of bullets flying overhead, but Monteith is unshaken. He decides the German machine guns across the field are the lesser threat, as the tall hedgerow thick with rocks and roots provides ample cover. The ones on their flanks are the biggest concern. He orders his men to stay put and cover him as he fits a rifle grenade to the end of his weapon's barrel. He leaps into action and his men open fire behind him. Keeping along the hedgerow, he spots the muzzle flash of an MG-42 firing away amongst the greenery. He approaches undetected, aims his rifle, and pulls the trigger. Monteith's aim is deadly, and the position explodes in a cloud of dirt and shrapnel, forever silenced. He returns, quietly, triumphant, and orders his men to repeat the strategy against the machine gun on the left flank. They open fire, and once again he leaps, but this time it's to an open field. He's unfazed, charging with determination. He reaches a suitable firing spot, but he's lost track of the enemy. He fires where he thinks they are, but he's mistaken. He reloads behind cover. He waits for something to reveal their position, but they simply aren't firing. With astonishing bravery, he purposely draws their fire. The machine gun fires at him, riddling the dirt with bullets. Fortunately, the meager cover proves sufficient, and now he's seen their position. He repositions himself and takes another shot. The melody of the German machine gun comes to an end with a bang. Monteith turns around and runs back to his men, braving the open field a second time.
Watch out, sir!
The beat of the brave heart of Virginia is brought to a tragic end in the green fields of France. Jimmy W. Monteith now rests in the American cemetery in Normandy, a fallen hero among many. His cross is emblazoned with a golden star, and the inscription, Medal of Honor. The medal would be delivered to his mother during a simple ceremony in her home. She placed it next to a picture of Jimmy she kept on her mantle.
It's the night of April the 13th, 1945, in Zwolle, in the Netherlands. Canadian soldiers from the Régiment de la Chaudière cautiously approach the city under cover of darkness. Crouching low beside the road, the commanding officer asks for 2 volunteers. For those who dare to step forward, the mission will be one of stealth and courage, not force or fight, or so everyone thinks. Despite reports of significant enemy forces in the area, they'll need to enter the city undetected, scout targets, and relay the information back to artillery batteries gearing up for the impending barrage, and if possible, make contact with Dutch partisans. In the quiet still of the night, 24-year-old bad-tempered French-Canadian private Leo Major and his friend Corporal Willie Arsenault share a quick glance. Then, nodding, the 2 men accept the challenge and throw themselves to their fate. Major, who from previous battles had already suffered many injuries, including a broken back, the loss of one eye, broken ribs, and he'd broken both ankles. Unwilling to be sent home, though, he argued that if he had just one eye to look into the scope, he was still capable of serving his country. I was a sniper. I still had one good eye, and I could still shoot, he later said. Now weighed down with Sten guns and grenades, the pair scurry into the shadows towards the central square. It's a beautiful old city, and oddly considering the circumstances, Major regrets that in just a few hours, it and many of its citizens will be reduced to rubble and ash. Arsenault agrees, and the daring Canadians hatch an amazing plan that may just save this historic city and its residents. The army of 2 will capture it, single-handedly. Making their way through the city, they occasionally see German soldiers and officers, but they're harried and preoccupied, and some stumble like they're drunk. The 2 men remain undetected. But as midnight approaches, Arsenault makes a fatal blunder, giving away their position, and pays for it dearly. When Germans nearby open fire, the 2 men take cover from the incoming fire and muzzle flashes. Major turns to his friend to figure out a way out of this mess, but with horror, he realizes that Arsenault's body is limp and that he's been fatally hit. That horror soon turns to sadness and then rage. Leo, mad with anger at the loss, struggles to restrain his infamous temper. What happens next is extraordinary. Instead of beating a retreat, he decides to continue the plan alone. He continues to the center of Zwolle, arriving at about 1 o'clock in the morning. The city streets are deserted, but spotting a German machine gun nest, he goes on the attack once more, storming it and eliminating the gun crew. Continuing on his rampage through the streets, he shoots at every target he can until he sees the HQ of the SS. It's a juicy target, and bursting through the door, he's confronted by 8 elite soldiers. Major later said, "They pulled a gun on me. But you know, with one eye, I can see better than most people at night. I killed 4 of them. The other 4 ran away." Walking on, he loses track of time and finds himself on the outskirts. When just a few yards away, he sees a young soldier behind the wheel of a German staff car, parked outside of a tavern. Major jumps the young man and takes him captive without firing a shot. Shoving the young soldier through the tavern door, he calmly disarms a tipsy officer drinking alone at the bar. Major assures him that the war will soon be over and that all of hell is coming, and that Major is part of a large Allied force advancing on Zwolle. Cleverly leaving out the part about being alone, he adds that the lovely city is about to be subjected to an epic bombardment. Not particularly keen on losing his life for a lost cause, the officer finishes his drink and says he's leaving and takes his men with him. The larger force is already long gone. Out of respect, Major returns the man's sidearm and the 2 part company. To confirm the officer's claims, Leo Major orders his young captive to drive him through the streets, while he shoots wildly and tosses grenades at targets of opportunity. Though his rampage does little damage, he's hell-bent on making a memorable commotion. Then, unable to find any more targets, he sets his captive free, and with his rage finally spent, the man walks dazed through the deserted streets for hours. Then, near collapse, he meets a wary Dutch farmer who takes him to the head of the local resistance. Major and the rest of the resistance men return to the square to alert residents that the city has been liberated. With just one thing left to do, Major and his new companions commandeer a car and return to collect the body of Arsenault. Sure that the killing and chaos are finally behind them, as the sun rises they carelessly drive towards the Canadian Chaudière, who fire on them, suspecting they're Germans. Furious and exasperated, Major climbs on top of the car, and when his bewildered compatriots recognize him, they lay down their arms. Leo Major reports that the city is nearly free of Germans. With that good news, the artillery bombardment is called off, and the city and its citizens are spared down to Leo Major's actions. For his heroic, if unsanctioned deeds, Major receives the Distinguished Conduct Medal, but ever the rebel, he declines the decoration because he considers General Bernard Montgomery incompetent and in no way worthy of bestowing it upon him. Although many of Major's exploits that night may have been embellished, it seems he killed more than 12 Germans in multiple engagements. It's the 13th of September 1942, and the bitter Battle of Stalingrad is in the early stages. High above in the skies are 4 Yak-1 fighters from the 437th Fighter Regiment, and they're on a mission to cover and defend the beleaguered city. In command is Major Stepan Danilov, a combat-experienced pilot, but in his charge today is a young pilot who at the age of 21 has shown great promise, but is yet to score a victory. Danilov plans to keep his eye on this young charge in the plane with number 32 on the fuselage. In the distance, a formation of Ju-88s is spotted, and they're not alone, being escorted by Messerschmitt Bf-109s. The 4 Yaks increase speed and spring into action. Rapidly approaching the Germans, the 4 Soviet pilots pick their targets. The Yak-1 was a fast, maneuverable plane that was deadly in the hands of a capable pilot, but it was lightly armed and needed a high degree of skill and accurate marksmanship in order to take down an enemy. The melee ensues and the Bf-109s from JG-53 break formation to engage the Soviets. The battle is on, but Danilov needn't have worried. Number 32 lines up the target and watches it loom larger and larger in the sights. The Ju-88 is at last within range, and number 32 unleashes a hail of machine gun fire. It's on target, and bullets rake the Junkers until it bursts into flames and starts falling in an arc towards the ground. It's the first kill for the young pilot, but that's not the end for number 32 on this fateful day. The 437th is a mixed squadron with men and women pilots. Commander Raiza Belayeva, also in a Yak-1, is in trouble.
A Bf-109 is all over her tail. Reisa pulls hard into a turn, desperately trying to shake off the German pilot, but it's no good. The 109 is on her like glue. In the pilot's seat of the 109 is German double ace Staff Sergeant Erwin Meyer. Number 32 spots that the commander is in trouble and comes to the rescue. With expert flying, 32 manages to get behind Meyer. Experienced as he is, Meyer spots the threat and knows he's in trouble and so reluctantly breaks off from his intended kill. Number 32 is having none of it though and deftly lets leash a burst of fire, perfectly timed. It's a critical hit and the Bf-109 pours smoke and oil. Meyer knows there's no way to get this bird down in one piece and opens the hatch and jumps out of his stricken warbird. The parachute opens and he sees his nemesis, the Yak-1 with 32, painted on the side, zoom past him as he drifts slowly into enemy territory. The Red Army conduct a search and capture the German. Marching him back to base, Meyer inquired if he could meet the pilot that bested him in the air, number 32. The Soviets agreed. After landing, the pilot of number 32 was summoned for a meeting with their vanquished foe. However, when the pilot entered the room, Meyer was dumbstruck. He was told that this is the pilot who had shot him down, who also happened to be a young, attractive woman, Lydia Litviak. Meyer cursed the Soviets for humiliating him with this joke in poor taste, but Lydia stepped forward and in a clear voice and with obvious disdain for the invader, she explained step by step how she bested the German double ace with 11 victories to his name.
No, verstehen?
Meyer, realizing he was face to face with the pilot that had vanquished him, apologized, took off his gold watch and offered it to the young woman. Fixing the German with her piercing blue eyes, she responded,
I don't accept gifts from my enemies.
Turned on her heels and left the German to contemplate his fate. She made history on that day by becoming the first woman pilot to shoot down an enemy aircraft. But this was just the start. The next day she engaged in an aerial battle against another Bf-109, this time piloted by Lieutenant Hans Fuss. Fuss had 71 victories to his name. Litviak managed to put a hole in his fuel tank. Fuss disengaged from the melee and sped for home, but ran out of fuel on his return. The 109 went down, somersaulting on the ground before reaching base. Lydia's fame grew. Her commanding officer said of her, she was very aggressive, a born fighter pilot. With her striking looks and fame in defending Stalingrad, she was given the name the White Lily of Stalingrad by her comrades. On February 1943, she was promoted to a junior lieutenant and chosen to join a group of elite pilots that were permitted to search for targets under their own initiative. These free hunters were made up of only the most experienced pilots. In recognition of this status, she had a white lily painted on the side of her plane. In March 1943, Lydia was flying as one of 6 Yak fighters. Spotting 12 Ju-88s, the Yaks engaged the group. Litviak, ignoring the escorting 109s, lined up a Ju-88 in her sights and took the plane down. But before she could get clear, a 109 had her in its sights. Raking the cockpit of Lydia's Yak-1, the White Lily was hit. Shrugging off the pain as best she could, she managed not only to keep control of her plane, but engaged and shot down another Bf-109, piloted by Lieutenant Franz Müller. Despite being in severe pain and losing blood, she managed to return to the airfield, but injury wouldn't stop Litviak, and she was back in the pilot's seat by May. Being in war and in a frontline position, her environment was very male-dominated, but Lydia continued to embrace her femininity and her rebellious nature. On August 1st, 1943, just a few days before her 22nd birthday, Lydia took off from her base at Krasny Luch. While on a mission with pilot Ivan Borisenko, she engaged a group of German bombers. She didn't see 2 Bf-109s that were protecting the bombers. One of them, piloted by Knight's Cross holder Hans-Jörg Merkel, intercepted the White Lily of Stalingrad, and she was struck. The planes disappeared behind a cloud out of Borisenko's view. According to German reports, the injured Soviet plane turned and rammed into the Bf-109, killing its pilot. Borisenko descended and searched for Lydia, but found no trace of her. The Soviets rarely, if ever, awarded the hero of the Soviet Union to those that were captured by the enemy. As time passed and the crash site wasn't found, the doubt lingered that Lydia had been taken prisoner by the Germans. Her friend, Pasportnikova, took it upon herself to prove that Lydia had not been captured. It took her 36 years with metal detectors and help from Lydia's family. Eventually, in 1979, after finding more than 90 other crash sites, Pasportnikova was told that a woman pilot had been buried in Dmitrivka after receiving a head wound. The remains were exhumed and a special commission concluded that this was the remains of the White Lily of Stalingrad. In 1990, 47 years after her plane had been downed, Lydia Litviak was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union by President Gorbachev. But that's not the end of this story. Many historians today believe that Lydia survived. In the year 2000, Nina Raspopova, a veteran of the famous Night Witches bomber regiment who knew Lydia, was watching a television broadcast from Switzerland. On that TV show, it featured a former Soviet woman fighter pilot who had been wounded twice, left the Soviet Union, and got married and had 3 children. Raspopova, in shock, looked at this old woman on the grainy TV image. Could it be Lydia? Unfortunately, we'll never know, as no further information was found on this mysterious Soviet veteran. Pasportnikova, when reminiscing of Lydia, said, "She never believed that she was invincible. She believed that some pilots had luck on their side and others didn't. She firmly believed that if you survived the first missions, the more you flew and the more experienced you got, your chances of making it would increase. But you would have to have luck on your side." It's the 10th of November, 1944, near Morville-les-Vicq, Normandy. The 761st Tank Battalion of the US Army is about to face serious action against a reinforced German division. The 761st have had to fight prejudice before they had even engaged the Germans, as they are composed entirely of black American soldiers and NCOs, commanded by white officers. Some army commanders expect them to flee at the first engagement, but the 761st are about to prove their worth. One of the M5 tanks of Company D is commanded by 21-year-old Sergeant Warren Gamaliel Harding Creasy, or simply Harding to his friends. This Texan sergeant may appear an unlikely soldier to onlookers. He's easygoing, polite, even meek, but he's also known as one of the most gung-ho, hardcore recruits since his training days at Camp Hood. As Harding stands on top of his M5, scanning the surrounding area while manning the vehicle's 50 caliber machine gun, the silence is broken by a barrage of fire that comes raining all around him. Harding and his crew are unharmed, but a direct hit has knocked out the tank. The unit's patch represents a Black Panther, not a sitting duck, and so before the Germans can attack again, Creasy dismounts the Stuart and commandeers a 30 caliber machine gun from a nearby jeep. Running towards the enemy positions, Sergeant Creasy opens fire, mowing down the crew of an anti-tank gun. He then turns his attention to a nearby machine gun nest. It's a duel of Browning versus Mauser, M1919 versus MG42, and the lone Texan gunner comes out on top. With all immediate threats wiped out, Harding and his crew commandeer another M5 and get on with the fight. Later, when a lieutenant from another division flags them down, he needs to inspect a hill and could do with a lift. The narrow treads can barely grip the snowy terrain, but the tank manages to crawl up the slope. Just as they approach the summit, there's a burst of fire, then another as the armor is blasted with machine gun bullets. Creasy orders his driver, Corporal Tyree, to back up. Ty kicks the machine into reverse, but the tank falls into an anti-tank ditch. Standing at an angle, the soft underbelly of the M5 is exposed to anti-tank weapons. As Tyree rocks the machine back and forth, the German machine gunners continue spraying their storm of lead. Creasy, calm under fire, immediately radios for help.
Another tank soon arrives to tow them out of the ditch, but who was going to brave the hail to connect the two tanks? Creasy flatly announces to his crew, "I'm going out to hook us up." Tyree replies, "Christ, Sarge." Creasy calmly adjusts his horn-rimmed glasses and answers, "Keep that thought." The sergeant then jumps out of the Stuart, wielding his Thompson 45 submachine gun. He empties an entire magazine towards the enemy to keep their heads low, then hooks up a cable between the two tanks. Ignoring the German bullets whizzing past, he waits for the second tank to pull his M5 out of the ditch, unhooks the cable, then jumps back inside. As his crew look at him in disbelief, Creasy offers his views on the German gunner. "That boy can't shoot shit. His sergeant ought to ship him back for retraining." But that boy must have a big brother in artillery somewhere, as an armor-piercing shell rams right into the side of the Stuart. The suspension is damaged. One track is completely lost. Harding has had 2 tanks shot from under him in the same day. In the turret, Creasy grips the triggers of a 50 caliber heavy machine gun. He soon realizes that the German MG-42s are now shooting at exposed infantry units. Harding redirects his fire towards the enemy nests, silencing their positions for good. The action is now over, and Sergeant Creasy can lead his crew back to the rear to regroup. But there's no respite from bad news. His best friend, Technician 4th Grade Horatio Scott with Company C, has been severely wounded. Their friendship goes all the way back to Camp Hood, and they've been inseparable since. Scotty has a message delivered to Harding. "It's okay, man. I'll be back soon." The morning after, Harding learns that Horatio died during the night while undergoing surgery. Creasy immediately requests a transfer to Company C to take the place of his fallen companion. Continuing the fight with Company C, Warren G. Harding Creasy earned the nickname of Iron Man and had a reputation as the baddest man in the 761st. Facing again direct fire from machine gun nests, he was described as going berserk. Creasy attacked the enemy positions single-handedly, spending every single round until his unit had to pry the empty machine gun from his hands. The 761st Battalion, the Black Panthers, distinguished themselves by fighting continuously for 183 days until the 6th of May 1945. Their Iron Man, Creasy, was nominated for a Medal of Honor, but was awarded the Silver Star instead. He was at the forefront of every attack during the 761st's 183 days of constant combat. The more fire he drew upon himself, the harder he fought.
Thank you for staying in to the end. Let us know in the comments if you made it all the way here.